Hello everyone and welcome to Blue Tengu's live game development show where we show everything that goes into making a game from concept to completion. If you've ever wanted to make a game, we hope this will help lower the barrier to entry, maybe give you the nudge you needed to try it yourself. Even if you don't want to make a game, we hope you'll find some entertainment value in what we're doing here. All of the information about where you can find us is in the Twitch info down below or in our YouTube profile for those of you who are catching us later. Just in case, we're at www.bluetengu.com. Tengu on Twitter, facebook.com Blue Tengu Studio, all one word, youtube.com Blue Tengu Studio, again all one word, for those of you watching the live stream now, and Twitch TV Blue Tengu for those of you who are watching us on YouTube. If you missed any episodes in the past, you can always catch them over at YouTube, but you shouldn't have any trouble following along even if you haven't seen them. For those of you who haven't seen the show on Twitch or YouTube before, my name's Eric. I'm a game designer living over here in Japan. And I'm trying to show you everything that goes into making a game for about 2 hours a week here, Saturday morning in Japan anyway, including all of the ums and ahs and awkward debugging moments that go into making a game. The reason I'm showing it all, as opposed to making the game first and scripting out a rehearsed tutorial, is because I want to lower the barrier, obviously, that you feel about making a game, and by seeing someone struggle with it, I hope that helps do that, and I hope it inspires you to go out and try it yourself. Thank you to everyone who dropped by last week, and to all of those of you who watched the video on YouTube. For those of you here with me on Twitch now, feel free to drop me suggestions or ask me questions at any time. There is a little bit of a lag in the chat, so, you know, even more than usual, I might be a little slow in responding, but I hope you don't mind. I may not be able to answer it right away as well because I am working, but I will try to get to your questions, and if I can't, please send me a private message here on Twitch or leave a comment on our site or YouTube video, and I'll do my best to address it for next time. If any of you are out there making something and you don't mind showing it off, send me a link to your stuff. I'd love to see it. Anyway, at this time every week for 2 hours, I come onto Twitch TV to work on the game Project Spaghetti, which is a top-down 2D cowboy shooter where the bullets fired bounce around the screen with a pinball mechanic. Last week I went back into gameplay and added a way for the player to know how many points they were getting based on the type of enemy they killed and how fast the bullet was going when the enemy died. And I did that by showing the point value right where the enemy died rather than having to look over at the score every time. Then to make obstacles like barrels in the game easier to add in future levels, maybe even opening up the way for random placement, I created a node system where the obstacles get dropped into the level on startup rather than just being hand placed in the rooms in the beginning. And after the show I used the overtime to do a little more work on the node system, fixing the way resolution affected dodging as well by pulling out hard-coded numbers that were in there, you know, pixels, number of pixels for the enemy to duck and things like that. Replaced them with something based more on the resolution. And I also pulled out common enemy functionality during the creation events and put them into scripts, so I don't have to keep updating multiple places every time I modify the enemy's logic, because that could lead to a lot of bugs. This week, I'm going to focus on getting some sound and some effects into the game, using some great external tools for retro projects. The first subject I'll add is sound effects, and that's to probably the barrels to start with. But before I do that, let's go over to my desktop and Trello.com where I keep my task list. So there we go with the desktop, and over here to Trello. If you do a search for Trello and Project Spaghetti, this will pop up. You won't be able to see these numbers at the top here because, well, unless you have the Scrum for Trello plugin, it won't add it up automatically. They'll just show up in parentheses, but the numbers will be there. And what these numbers are the number of hours I expect a task to take. Today's episode, episode 14, I did load in a lot of hours into here. So yeah, as you can see, it's 5 hours, even though the show's only 2 hours. I'm hoping that once I get on a roll with sound effect making, won't take that long, and implementation, once I get the first sound effect in and figure that out, probably won't take that long to figure out the other ones. So I think these are way overestimated, which is why I put a bunch of these tasks into one episode. And also, I mentioned on bluetengu.com in a post, but I want to pair any adding of like sound effects to something visual as well. In this case, like the bullet hitting like one of those barrels is a bumper and bouncing off. I want to have a sound effect for that, but that conveys information to a player who, one, has the sound turned on, and two, can hear. And as I said in the post, depending on where you look, anywhere from 10 to 20% of the population at least struggles at some point with, to some degree at least, with hearing loss. So also want to pair any information that I'm conveying with sound to information, visual information as well. So those bumper hits, it's, as game information goes, it's probably not that critical. So, if you can't see a visual representation of it, it's not going to affect the gameplay that much, I don't think. But, even if it's not to help players who don't have the sound turned on, it at least adds a little bit of visual panache to it, I guess, by having some particles come off the barrels when the bullet bounces off. And the same thing with Gunfire, when the player cowboy shoots his gun and when the enemy cowboys shoot their guns. We want sound effects for that, as well as, some particles coming out of the gun. For dodge and dying, visually, I've got that rough dodge animation in there so you can visually see that the player is dodging and the enemies are dodging, so that's already covered. It just needs a sound effect. And for dying, it's pretty obvious when you die, and there'll be an animation later for that as well. So these two are covered visually, these two are not. And since it is a new month, October 4th, I do want to go over and, like I do every month, kind of revisit the plan to make sure that everything's kind of on schedule, or if I need to move things around or whatever. And I counted up all the tasks that I did from episode, starting with episode 2, because episode 1 was kind of an introductory episode and it's kind of an oddball. So from episode 2 to episode 13, I basically counted up all the tasks, divided it by 12 for those 12 episodes, and what I got was I seem to get around 2.5 hours worth of tasks done per episode. And the reason, I have estimated two hours worth of tasks. Well, I have estimated that the show is going to take 2 hours. And in reality, because I have this introduction and everything else, I'm working on the project for about an hour and a half. But despite that, I usually get about 2.5 estimated hours worth of tasks done. And that's the whole point of Agile, to kind of, you estimate things and your estimates are going to be wrong, but it's just to try to compensate for that. And I tend to go a little faster than I expect. So keeping that in mind, with that December deadline I have, the December deadline's not the whole game, it's just the gameplay deadline, but there's 13 weeks left of that. I started back in July, which means I'm at the halfway point to that. And with 13 weeks left, if I can get about 2.5 hours done per episode, that means I get about 32.5 hours worth of tasks. And looking over at the task list, that means that I can get about through the desert level. Because if you count all of these, like option, add sound effects volume, brush up the cowboy movement, add some rough animation, throw in some music, all this stuff, that 32.5 mark comes down around here. So, the night level with the aliens and stuff like that probably won't make it by December unless, I adjust my plans, and that's why I want to do this whole thing with, checking once in a while to make sure that I'm on schedule. So what I could do, for example, is if by December I want to make sure that all the gameplay itself is in there, what I could do is move some of these music tasks, which are, nice for atmosphere in the game, but, compared to gameplay, it's probably not as important. So I could move, a couple of these tasks down below here to make sure that, all of the gameplay tasks are done by December. And I think I'll do that later. But for now, I will leave them there. One thing about making these music tasks is probably, to come here every week, these are about 3 hours a piece because I'm not very good at making music. I use a program called LMMS, and I have no musical background whatsoever, so it takes me a while to make music. All that intro music that you heard and everything else is stuff I've made, but it takes some time, and it usually doesn't come out as I expect. And so I do have these tasks estimated at pretty long, and if I'd make episode after episode after episode of me just making music, that's not very interesting, probably for you guys. So what I probably will do is for these things do them outside of the show, but I will at least show, my attempt to make one of them, I suppose. I may not finish, but at least I'll kind of show the process of how I'm making it, because I do want to show everything that goes into making a game. But first task is to add sound effects to the game. But before I do that, I should probably show where we're at with the game itself. And I'm using a program called Game Maker Studio to make the game. And I hope I didn't click that way too many times. We'll see if a bunch of these pop up. No, it looks like I'm good. Okay, so hit play, show you where I'm at. Okay, and I have the smaller version of the game saved here so I can still kind of see Game Maker in the background, but in an older episode we did have it where you can change the resolution. This I think is one of the smallest ones. But anyway, you start the game, you've got the cowboy. There's no animation, it's just very rough graphics. Obviously, you see these buildings up there. So those are just very, very rough graphics. You've got cowboys ducking, you've got those the point values coming out. You got my player getting shot up pretty well because I wasn't paying attention in the beginning. And you move to other levels, etc. You've got a pause screen, you can go back to the title, you can change options, continue, etc. So that's where we are with the game itself. And I want to add sound effects. To make sound effects for a retro game, there's a great web-based program called BFXR. There's also a version that you can download, but let me just show you where that is. On YouTube, I'll probably put a little annotation up that shows where that is. But it's pretty obvious. If you just look for BFXR in Google, it'll pop up. It's just bfxr.net. And what it is someone very amazing put together this program here that generates kind of retro sounding sound effects for you. And you can export them as WAV files, you can save these settings so you can go back and modify them later. You can also download the standalone version for Windows or Mac. It's a great program for doing this because I'm not a sound designer, so I don't want to be fiddling with sound settings, nor do I want to attempt to do horrible Foley by bringing in shoes and clapping them together and stuff to try and make sound effects. If I had a sound designer, that's probably what they would start doing for me, but I don't, and probably a lot of you don't either. So this is a great way to kind of make up for that. And I did go through in the past and make a whole bunch of these things, and it kind of kept track of that for me, which I'm kind of impressed with. But it's already got all these presets over here to the side. For example, a pickup. Sounds like a pickup or a coin, like in a Mario game or anything else. And every time you click it, creates a new random one. So you can, click until you get one that's pretty close to what you like, and then start going in here and fiddling with these, settings until you get exactly what you want. Or if you don't even know what these settings do, you can just keep clicking and clicking until you get exactly what you want. And once you do get what you want, yeah, what you want to do is you want to export the WAV file. Like here, it says pick up coin, for example. You can just save that as just a WAV file that you can use right off the bat. You also should, if you do like one of the sounds and you want to export it, you should also save this .bfxr sound file so that later on you can go back and edit it if, you know, after time you start to realize, I want it to be a little bit longer, a little bit louder, or whatever. Let me drink my water because I'm chatting a lot here. So that's that. And, you know, I did download the Windows program, so I don't need to go through the web interface per se. So I will go right into here. Real simple program. It's the exact same thing as the web one. And the first thing is to do a bumper hit. And what that bumper hit is, you know, I'm calling them bumpers because, you know, I've got kind of a pinball idea for the game. So it's anything that bounces off the ball or the bullet. So each of those, you know, hits the barrel. That's when I want to put out that sound effect. So, you know, I could try to make different sound effects for, you know, barrels versus, you know, like later on there might be tombstones and, you know, bones and things like that the bullet's bouncing off of. But because I want the game to be a little bit more abstracted, I probably want to just have, you know, a pinball style, you know, bounce sound for when bullets bounce off of barrels and, you know, anything else so that they can share the sound effects. And of these, you know, let's go through them. Pick up, you know, you know what they are based on just what they say in the name, but yeah, so you get a good variety in here. Probably the one that I'm going to be using is hit or hurt. No, that's not a very good example, but something like that, where it does sound like there's, you know, kind of a bounce. There's also jump. That's actually pretty good. Let's save that one. And these are just rough sounds, obviously. You know, I could go in and fiddle with them later. Let me just make sure I save both of those. And actually, that's even closer to what I want. So, blip. Just to show you how it works. And you can also randomize, which gives you more variety than any of these. The only problem is, of course, because it's completely random, you have no idea what you're going to get. One other good one is if you did find a sound that's close to what you like, but you're not comfortable fiddling with these settings, you can go over here to jump, for example, and then click on mutation. And it'll just give, you know, slight little variations of that. And if you know what you're doing, you can just go in here and make exactly what you want right off the bat. So, you know, that's that. I did have, sorry for the looping, should probably turn that off, but anyway. So otherwise it'll annoy you even more. By the way, if you're watching this on YouTube or, you know, if you're watching Twitch and it's late at night or whatever, you probably do want to turn the volume down because there's going to be a lot of annoying sounds going off. Fair warning. And, you know, I do have a BGM null in here, but I want to start putting sound effects in here. In GameMaker, there's a whole type of object called sounds. To add a sound, all you have to do is sound, create sound. You get a bunch of options here, but first let's go grab that file, that blip that sounded good. And I'm gonna name all the sound effects with SFX in front so that I know what they are, to distinguish them from like background music sounds, which are BGM. And I'm gonna call this, let's see, what did I call it here? Barrel bumper hit. Okay, so I'll call it SFX bumper 01, just in case I make a whole lot of these. And there's a bunch of attributes down here as well. To understand the difference between these, you know, if you're used to working with games and sound, you kind of know what they are, but usually if something is not streamed, it means that, what streaming is, this last option, what streaming is the sound is kept on the disc or, whatever, CD, whatever you use for the game. DVD, I guess. Nobody uses CDs anymore. It stays on there until you need it, and when you need it, it loads and plays, and then when you don't need it, gets it out of memory. What that does is usually you have a limited amount of memory, so you don't want to be clogging it with a bunch of sounds. The problem is if you stream from the disk, it takes time. So, for example, for a sound effect, like the bounce off of that barrel, I want that to happen as soon as the bullet hits the barrel. I don't want, just some random delay, because after the bullet's already like going off in another direction, if it takes time to read from the hard disk, it could like make that bloop sound, long after it's away from the barrel. So, given that, why would you ever use streamed sounds? Well, there are certain sounds that doesn't really matter too much if it's like, half a second off. And that's usually voice is usually pretty forgivable unless it's, well, let's explain. Let's say voice is usually forgivable as long as it's just, chit-chat. It's like if characters are just talking and it's chit-chat, especially with video games, there's no, well, unless you're making like Uncharted or something like that, there's no like lip syncing involved. So it doesn't matter if things are a little off. There are voices where you do want to play them as sound effects, and that's things like reactions, like getting hurt or getting shot, or grunting when you jump up to grab a ledge, things like that. You do want to treat those as sound effects, even though they are voice. The other thing you want to stream is music, because music files can be quite large, and if it takes half a second to start, it doesn't really matter because usually you have load screens and everything else anyway. But anyway, this is a sound effect, so I'm just going to keep that uncompressed, not streamed, which means it stays in memory, but it doesn't use much processor, and I don't have a delay. Here also are all of these options, whether you play stereo or 3D. I'll keep it stereo, keep it 16-bit. Well, I'll keep the default settings for that. Also, there's this edit sound command. Right now, I do have a free program called Audacity linked to that, so I could go in here and start fiddling with settings if I want to. And you can change that. I think it's over in Preferences. Is it Preferences or is it Global Game Settings? Feels like it's in Preferences. There we go. In Preferences under Editors, you can define, like, if you want to edit an image, what you use, if you want to edit a sound, what you use, and I have it tied to Audacity. So that's that. Let's rename that sound effect, because I think I didn't say OK to it or something. Let's see. Okay, well, it's fine now. And there's also this volume control. You can test the sound by hitting play up here. Wow, I guess it didn't really save any of that stuff. I must have jumped out of this the wrong way. Let's try that again. Yeah. Okay, we don't need it to loop on us. That is quite loud. In terms of background music's probably going to be a little quieter in general. So I'm going to make the default volume on that kind of towards the middle here, just so it's not super, super loud. And script-wise, I do have a function that I made called script play sound effects, and all this does is it takes whatever I pass into it and plays it with a priority of 5. I just gave it a generic 5. I shouldn't run out of sounds because there's not that many sounds in the game. And I don't have it looping. And also, because I do have a volume setting, and I want to distinguish between background music and sound effects volumes, I do have a global variable called global volume sound effects. So it sets the sound effect to that volume immediately. which is what that 0 is. So all I have to do to play a sound effect is call this. And where I want to call it is not from barrel, which is the bumper object, but from bullet, because I want to play that sound effect when it hits the barrel, which is what this is. It's a collision event. Right now what's in this collision event is the bounce, as well as keeping track of how many times the bullet is bounced. So this is where I want to add the ability to play the sound effect. And the sound effect I want to play is that one I just made, which is FX bumper 01. And maybe that's all I need to do. Let's try it out. There we go. Yeah, Game Maker makes some things very easy. Now, you're going to notice something once these bullets really start bouncing off the barrels, and that's that sound is getting really annoying when it's going off over and over and over again. And one of the reasons it's really annoying is because it's the exact same sound, which is why I do have to make, about 5 variations of that. Compared to other sounds, that's going to happen a lot, so I did have room to make a lot of variations. In most video games and pinball games, for example, you don't have the exact same sound every time, because that would get really old really fast. And what's the point of making sounds if people want to turn the volume down on your game? So let's go in here, make a few more of those. Glad to see it's working at least. That's a good start. The one I liked is blip, so let's try another random blip and see what it sounds like. Well, that one's good. Blip select. Make sure I have both of these. It's definitely a different sound. That's kind of similar. It's a nice deep thud. It's too similar. That should be different enough. And these are just rough sounds, just to get something in the game later on. I'm probably going to want to adjust those a little more, but for now it should be enough. Now, I'll just add the sounds first before I get to the next topic here. Make sure I remember which one's which. Let's just go in order. Blip select 3. Keep it in stereo. Not even sure if the sound effect file itself that this thing produces is in stereo, so maybe I'm just adding information that doesn't need to be added, but just in case. I can look into that later. So that's bumper 2. By the way, someone on Twitch was nice enough to actually say that this was to promote this channel and say the show was starting. So if any of you guys came here from there, let me know, because definitely want to thank that person. It's been there are some episodes where it can get kind of lonely in here because obviously, Twitch, of course, does a good job of promoting the things that players are going to find more interesting, and frankly, game development is not nearly as exciting as like an Evo tournament or anything else. So completely makes that sense as to why don't have huge crowds of people coming in. But thank you for coming in here and watching. By the way, do appreciate it. Gives me my motivation to wake up really, really, really early on Saturday morning to do this. Yeah. Really wish that would just play it once instead of looping it. Just to make sure I did put sound effects in all these places. Yep. 5 kind of sounds familiar, similar to one of the other ones, so I may want to replace that later. But, okay, so I've got 5 varieties of sound effects, but inside of barrel, oops, made the same mistake I said not to make. Inside a barrel, all I'm saying is play this particular sound effect. You know, that's probably not what I want to do. So let's see, how am I going to go about this? I want to be able, when I say play sound effects bumper, to play any one of these 5. It'd be nice if I could just automatically, you know, pick one of these based on, you know, just the first half of this. Because, let's see, hard coding it into all of these arguments means I only have 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, actually, I do have 5 slots, so let's do it that way for now. Hopefully, I don't have any sound effects that require more than 5 variations, but no, I don't know if I want to do it that way. See, these are some of those ums and ahs I was talking about at the beginning of the show. Obviously, since I'm doing this live and I haven't rehearsed anything or done any of this stuff in advance, I have to figure it out as I go. Hopefully that gives you the courage to say, if this guy can do it, I can do it. Let's see. So, instead of calling these sound effects directly, probably could create a new script that has all of the sound effects in tables. Because usually, in a big game, for example, you would have a table that says what all your sounds are. It would have a sound file, and it would have like a label for playing that, as well as like, you know, parameters that you want to call for it. So if we want to do something similar in here, that table would go into scripts. So for example, let's see if I can remember how to make an array here. I want 2-dimensional. Yeah, okay. 2-dimensional array. And since I'm going to need to know the count later on, I'll have to remember how to do the count here. I remember, I think it's height 2D or whatever, so let's see how that goes. Let me rename this. That's going to come at the very end. Let's see, SFX bumper. Actually, I could probably get away with just a 1-dimensional array, couldn't I? Sound effects bumper equals sound effects bumper 1. And I'll try this solution first. If it doesn't work, I'll think of something else. There's one drawback to this is that I do have a lot of stuff sitting in global variables, but you know, if you have a sound table, it's basically sitting there in memory anyway, so kind of the same. Kind of the same thing. Let's see, sound effects bumper. Just so I don't have to count up the array every time I do this. And let's see if I'm picking from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Probably don't need this -1. Do I? No, probably not. It's pretty obvious, but I'll leave a note to myself just so I remember what this is later. And other stuff will go in here. So let's see, sound effects bumper and bumper count. Okay, I think I know exactly how I can do this with this information anyway. Sound effects play SFX. So the argument I'm going to be passing in is not this file name, it's going to be this. I believe. I could probably pass in the count too. Little sound effects bumper. That's the priority. Oops, whoops, whoops, whoops. I'm putting this in the wrong place. That still needs to be argument for now. Yeah, I don't want to do this. I want to pass in the array if it lets me, and because some programming languages get a little funny when it comes to passing arrays, so we'll see what happens. I think I called it bumper count, didn't I? Yeah, and I have to put global in front too. So it knows what these variables are. Okay, so I'm passing in an array and the count. Let's see what this does. I probably do want to have a check in here, but I'm not going to worry about that for now, so let's just go with for if I equals 0, I is less than the, it says argument 1, but it's the second one, which is the count. I plus plus. Oops. No, that's not what I wanted to do. What am I doing? I don't need a for loop. I don't want to play all the sounds. I random. This is a really crazy way to write this, but let's see if it works. Something tells me it won't work this way, but if GameMaker is smarter than I expect, then it will. Oops. Argument 1, random. That has to be parentheses. And then that. Okay. That'd be awesome if GameMaker actually figured that out for me. Let's find out. Nope. Get SFX bumper count. Did I just say something wrong there? SFX bumper count. Bullet. When it hits the barrel. No, I did spell that right. So it's probably not letting me get away with that then. Yeah, it doesn't know what that global variable is. Let me try that one more time to see if I can get some information on it. Okay. SFX bumper count. For some reason it knows what this is, just doesn't know what this is. That's really weird. I would have expected, if anything, it would have choked on this part. SFX bumper count. I'm not doing anything weird, am I? Global SFX bumper count. No, I know what I'm doing wrong. Never actually loading this script anywhere. Okay, well that would do it. Yeah, let's actually load that script. I forget that a lot in GameMaker for some reason. I don't know why. I've done that before, like with the globals persistent. I think when I added it, I forgot to do that and was confused as to what was going on. Well, now I don't know what the variable is, but it might error somewhere else. Wow, go GameMaker. All right, well that actually worked, thankfully. So what I'm doing, if you remember, the first argument I'm passing into here is SFX bumper, and the second argument I'm passing into here is SFX bumper count. And this is just an array, so this is basically SFX bumper 01, 02, 03, etc. And this is saying that there's 5 of them. So what audio play sound does now is it's taking SFX bumper and it's picking the one to play based on a random number from 0. I think that's how iRandom works anyway. I better check. iRandom goes from 0 to whatever's in here, which is 5. So that's actually a bad idea if that's how it's working. iRandom. Good thing to check it out here. Okay, so it gives the upper range. Yeah, so I didn't end up with an error, but I should have. Because right now it's 5, which means if I use iRandom 5, it could return anything from 0 to 5. And in this array, because SFX bumper 01 is, I think, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Theoretically, it'll try to call this thing that doesn't exist at the end here, and should crash. But for all I know, GameMaker's arrays could default to starting from 1. So let me check that out. I've looked this up before, but I keep forgetting because every programming language does this differently. Usually hardcore programming languages will start from 0, and nicer, script-friendly programming languages will start from 1. Because it is kind of a weird concept for people to get used to the fact that 0 means something. So let's see, GameMaker arrays. Let's see what it says here. Now, it appears that GameMaker does start from 0, so here's a good graphic of what's going on. Inside of array 0.0 is that first sound effect, 1 is the second one, 2 is the third one. So they're all kind of like off by a number. And so what I want to do is subtract 1 here. If I wanted to save, even that subtraction step, I could probably subtract it directly from SFX bumper count, which might be a good way to go. Let's do that. Might as well save ourselves a step. It's not that tricky to remember, so I will add the -1 here. And let's just make sure that still works. Okay, it's not crashing on me, and there's definitely a variety of sounds going on, so it's fine. Still a little bit annoying, but I think part of that is because I have the volume all the way up. So I'm going to try turning this down a little bit. I don't want to, scare any of you off with horrible, horrible sounds going on here. But in terms of a rough bumper hit sound, that takes care of that. So that's done. Next, try for some gunfire, dodging, and dying. So let's create a bunch of gunfire things here over in BFXR. I still have it open. And probably of these things, the closest thing to gunfire is going to be from an explosion. It's going to be a little overkill on some of these sound effects, but I'm sure there'll be some smaller explosion sounds that'll work for guns. Yeah, that's a little big for a gun. Close. Yeah, that's not bad. Okay, we'll save that one. Let's try a mutation. You might want to turn your volume down until I find what I'm looking for. Oh, that wasn't too bad. A little long, though. Let's see. Decontain. Sustain. Let's try turning that down a bit. Decay time. Yeah, that's good. So as you can see, if you get something that's kind of close to what you're looking for, but you want to modify, how long it's sounding or just a little fine-tuning, you can just come over here and do that. It's not a bad start. Let's see what it sounds like if I do that. Let's go with that. SFX gun. Let's call it SFX gun. And those are all explosions. So let's just do these in order. Make sure it works. Yep. Stereo. Add that one. The scary thing about doing a show with sound is I know that it's very easy to get annoyed when weird sounds come out of a computer when you're watching someone do something, so thank you for sticking with me on this episode. That one I didn't load, so of course it's not going to play. Yep, okay. That's a good sound, actually. I like that third one. So that's SFX Gun 3. Let's add that to the sound table here. Use the exact same format. I was talking with another game designer the other day about how crazy it is that Excel, Microsoft Excel is used everywhere. And one example of where Excel is used is often this sound table. So if you are on a game design team, or if you do go into game design, you'll probably run into Excel quite a bit. And this is one of the spots you'll usually run into it, because a lot of people keep track of their assets and everything else in an Excel file, because it's convenient to add and subtract lines, add columns, things like that. And it can output as either a comma separated list or XML, and then programs can work with that. So Excel is actually pretty developer friendly. You end up using it for just about everything. So one skill you do want to pick up if you're going to go into game design is probably working with Excel and using VBA macros, Visual Basic. Can't remember what the A was. The Visual Basic A macros, because it'll make your life easier. So that's SFX gun. And I want to do the same thing I did for bullet, except When would I want the gun to fire? There's different places I could put it. I could put it where the player shoots and where all the enemies shoot. That's one place. The other possibility is to put it in the bullet creation, assuming that if a bullet gets made, that means it was fired. It depends on your game. Like, if you did for some reason have bullets that didn't get fired, you wouldn't want to put it in here. You'd want to put it in the individual places where they're being shot. In terms of this game, I can't really imagine a situation where a bullet is going to just suddenly appear without being fired out of a gun. And then if I do get around to making like aliens and things with different types of attacks, the thing they're firing is not going to be a bullet. So I probably don't have to worry about it. If a bullet is being fired, it's fired from a gun, so I can put that in here. So let's do the same thing. SFX gun and gun count. And let's see if that works. Let's give the enemy a chance to shoot just to make sure it has a sound effect. Okay, good. You know, I'm thinking now, because the bouncing sound effect and gunfire sound effect is going to come up a lot, I should probably even come up with a lot more than just 5 variations of these sounds. I should probably come up with, 10, 20, whatever. Because they're not that hard to make, and I can just keep adding variations just to make sure that you don't hear the same sounds over and over again, because humans are sensitive to sound, and that's why sound can be one of the most annoying things. If you've ever tried to sleep while construction work is going on, you know exactly what that means. But for now, Gunfire is in the game, at least as a rough sound, and there's 3 sound effects, so I did exactly what I was planning to do. Let's try dodge. And let's go ahead and do the 2 sound effects together. Dodge and dying. Dying is going to be a weird one. Like, what does dying sound like? Obviously, it's usually going to be like a groan or something. So maybe in the future I'll want to replace whatever I put in here with like just me going into the microphone and going ugh and making sound effects. We'll see. For now, I'll see what I can do with the magic of BFXR here. But first thing is dodge. And actually, do I have getting hit? Well, actually, that is dying because nobody has hit points yet, so... Alright. Well, I guess the player does. Let's add that kind of on the fly here. And, these sound effects tasks aren't taking nearly as long as I expect them to, so... And I'll label that music and sound effects, just so I know what kind of task it is later on when I'm looking back through these things. Okay, so dodge, dying, and hit. What would be a good dodge sound? Jump. It's close. Let's see. It's a little too long there. That's a little too powerful, isn't it? 20. That's not bad. It's a little loud, but let's see. Maybe I'll knock the punch down on it. Okay, yeah, that's better. Just in case I want to come back into it later. Okay, so that's a good dodge sound effect, even though he's not jumping. It says jump over here, but... let's try going with that one and shortening it. Yeah, that's not bad. And one more. Okay. If it looks like I know what I'm doing, I'm not. I'm just kind of fiddling with things that sound like they're going to do what I want them to do, so don't worry. I'm definitely no expert at this. Well, you can probably tell that by the sounds I'm making. Okay, well, let's do hit before dying, because dying is going to depend on what hit sounds like, I guess. And there is a hit hurt button here, so, well, there we go. Yeah, that's not too bad. It's a little too strong. Not too bad. It might sound exactly like the one I just made, but it sounds okay. And you can see I'm creating all these files out here. It's not too bad. Nah, that's actually good. Okay. Now let's see what dying sounds like. Does dying sound more like a laser or power up? Probably more like a power up. That's a good sound, but not what I'm looking for. That's probably the sound of some creature dying somewhere. It's a little too strong. That's not too bad. Just have to shorten that one. Yeah, that's a good dying sound effect. Let's see if I can get a mutation on it. Nah, it's too close. We'll work with that for now, just so I don't annoy the heck out of you out there. Alright, so dodge, hit, dying, I think I have 3 of each of those. So let's jump in here and add those temporary sounds. X dodge 01. See if I can remember which one's which here. Dodge for all the jumps. And I think 2 was something else, so I'm going to start with 10. Put that into stereo. Jump 11, stereo uncompressed, yep. SFX dodge 03. Stereo again, and that's the last of the jump sound effects. Jump 12. Okay, and then I want to add the hit ones. So if the player gets hit, this can also double as a dying sound maybe later if I decide to switch things around a little bit. But for now, I'll just use the hit ones that I came up with. SFX hit. And all of the hit ones are these ones. So 1, 2, 3, so 4, 10, and 19. I don't need 3D sound for a retro game. I don't even have a 3D setup. I wouldn't be able to check it. There we go. Hit 2. And the last of the hits, 19. Okay, and the last one is dying, so let's just call it SFX dead 01. And those are all those power-up sounds. So 7, 19, and 22. Okay, so the first thing to implement is dodge. Both the player and the enemy can dodge, so I need to do this for both of them, but let's add all this stuff to the sound table first, because otherwise I'm going to get an error saying I don't have this stuff. Dodge, SFX, dodge. One down, and the others are all 3s, so let's just copy this. Hit sound effect, same thing except with hit. And the last one is dead, dying sound effect. Just so I remember what this thing is later, I should put dying in there. Because if I do make ghosts, I may make a mistake on what dead actually means. Okay. Make sure I haven't forgotten to copy and paste something or change it. So we've got dodge, hit, dead. Now it's just putting them in the actual game where they're appropriate. So I want to play this sound effect dodge whenever the player dodges first. So let's see, that is if player 1 dodge is true, that means play that animation. But that's not where I want to put the sound effect, because it'll come into here every frame and play this, because it keeps that animation sprite going as long as this is true. So I don't want to put it there, because otherwise I'll get a looping sound effect. Would rather probably put it here when the player starts to dodge. So that's good for the player. Now I need to do the same thing for the enemy. And let's see, where would the enemy decide to dodge? If enemy is ready to dodge, can dodge. Okay, this is where I want to do it for the enemy. And the exact same sound, so that's fine. So that's dodging. Now let's see, hit. The player's the only one that can get hit, right? Or should I say the player's the only one that can die? How do I want to divide up these sound effects? Because the dead sound effects are a little more powerful than the hit sound effects. So I probably do want to use the dead sound effect for when the player runs out of lives and for when an enemy goes down. So the player is going to be the only one with hit sound effects, at least until I put hit points into enemies or whatever. So if it collides with a bullet, actually, I have if lives are equal to 0, but if I add an else here, that means if the player still has lives left, then I can do this. So if they have lives left, they just get hit by the bullet. If they're out of lives, then I can do that they're dead. And I want to do the same thing for the enemy, except when an enemy collides with a bullet, which is very unfortunate for the enemy. Yep, make sure they're dead. Alright, let's see what this sounds like. And if everything's working, I'll probably take a break after this. Okay, player sounds fine. Good. Okay, well that actually went pretty smoothly. Let me save that here. And I don't think I'm going to screw anything up when I start to do particle effects next, so I don't know if I need to back up my project, but just to be on the safe side, I will back this up. And I'll just say this is the step before adding particles, which is going to be the next thing after the break. So let's jump over to Trello here. I did get all of these sound effects out of the way. You know, I way overestimated how much work it would be to get rough sound effects into the game. You know, in terms of getting good sound effects or exactly what I want into the game, it's probably going to be one of those things where as I play it, I'll start to recognize sounds that don't sound right or that sound kind of annoying and kind of edit those as I go. I would imagine that's going to be the process I use to arrive at, you know, better sounds. And dying may keep the retro sound, or I may go with like a groan or something. Just have to kind of keep my ears open over time and see what it sounds like. So I am going to take a quick break, but after the break I'm going to get to the particles that I talked about at the beginning of the show, where if the bullet bounces off a barrel, you know, there's a little bit of like a dust spray or something. And same with gunfire. When someone fires a gun, I'm going to want, you know, a spray of particles to come out of that. This might take longer than I expect because getting those particles where the gun is might be tricky. We'll see. This will also be affected by animation later if the player can turn left or right, because right now there's no animation. But if the player can change the direction their gun is, then I'm going to have to keep track of that in terms of where these particles are spraying out of. But at least for now, since the player and the cowboys always face the same direction, it shouldn't be too difficult to get it lined up. But I'll show you, you know, another tool that helps make particles for GameMaker, but that'll be after the break, because I do need to take a quick one to kind of recharge my voice and get some more coffee. So I'll be back in, let's see, probably about 2 minutes. For those of you who are watching this on YouTube, it'll just be a quick fade and I'll be right back. Jump off the desktop there. Okay. Stick with me, I'll be right back. Okay, thank you for waiting. Hopefully that wasn't too long of a break. I did recharge my voice a little bit. I've been chatting a lot this show, so it's kind of dying on me. It's been an interesting week in Japan. I had volcanoes going off, have a typhoon rolling in, but that's Japan. Thank you for watching the show and sticking with me. Now I'm going to move on to particles from sound effects, which I was doing at the first half of this show. Thankfully, things went smoothly with that. But the little I know about sound effects is a lot more than what I know about particles and making good particles, so may have a little trouble making something that's exactly what I want. But there is a tool for making particles for GameMaker that is pretty easy to use. So let's show you that. Just to jump over to the task list, the two particles that I want to make for this show, because I added sound effects and I want visual cues for people who have the sound off, to have that same information. It's particles when a bullet bounces off the barrels and particles when a gun gets fired. So those are the two I want to make. Now the tool I'm going to be using is something called Particle Designer. And I do have to give you a heads up on this, because if you look for, let's see, GameMaker particles, I think so. Let's see. Now this is just describing the thing, the actual document. Yeah, it's this page. One of the first pages that you'll come up to if you just look for how to make particles in GameMaker is one of these programming pages. Take a look at the date, October 1st, 2013. Down at the bottom, the thing I'm going to be using is called Particle Designer. It's by a company called Alert Games. And if you use this link that's here, that's fine. You get over to here, you can download Particle Designer. Problem is, 2.3 was trying it out, and it kept crashing, giving me errors saying like the menu's broken, etc., etc. And it's like, oh well, great. What am I going to do to make particles if this thing doesn't work? Because it's what I've used in the past for a few things too. But I found out that this link is actually really, really old, and what you have to do is go directly to Alert Games site. And if you do that, you can grab the most recent Particle Designer 2, which is 2.5. Fixes like a bunch of bugs which will crash the program or not even allow you into the program. So you definitely want this version, and I will post a link to that. But if you go to alertgames.net, you go to software, Particle Designer 2, that's where it is. But I will post an annotation up on YouTube for those of you who are watching, so you can at least see the link in case that's easier for you. But this is where you want to go to grab it. And when you do, just unzip it into a folder, and you've got the program right here. And this is what you get to start with. Just a bunch of defaults basically, and it looks much more threatening than it really is, because at least with particles, and at least with Particle Designer, the descriptions actually do a pretty good job of saying what these numbers mean and what they do. But the first thing you can do is, well, the first thing you should realize about bursts and particles streams is a burst is this, throws out particles and then it's done. A stream keeps throwing out particles. Now the reason you have to recognize the difference between those two is if you do a stream, that means at some point you're going to have to remember to stop that stream. And if you don't, even if, for example, the room changes and the particle appears to have disappeared, you'll still have that thing sitting in memory. And so, particles are often a source of memory leaks, and the reason is because most of the time the actual graphical particles coming out are one thing, but the thing that's generating those particles is another thing. And so even though you don't see the particles coming out, there's still this thing there that's ready to make particles. And because it's not represented visually, you might forget that it's there, forget to clean it up. And if you keep jumping into your stage over and over and over again, you'll eventually fill up your memory and your game will crash. So, fair warning, particles can be dangerous to work with. It's not scary as long as you remember to clean them up, but just kind of a word of warning if you do go out and do your own project. So, when a bullet hits the barrel, I just want a single spray. I don't want some constant spray of particles. Maybe when the cowboy dies, I can have just a giant spray of blood that keeps going for hours and hours. I'm not going to do that, but could do that. But I'm going to want to burst. And, that's fine to kind of use this generic red thing that they gave me, but it's probably not what I want. So Particle Designer, one good thing about it that's a lot like BFXR is that if you don't know what you're doing, you can come up to here and choose one of these like random ones. So you can have ideal random, full random. And as you can see, you can keep going until you get something that's close to what you want. And again, just modify the one that's close enough to what you're looking for. I mean, at the end of the day, that because it's a retro game, that that original like red dot spray is probably the closest thing to what I want, as opposed to some of these crazy things. But since I don't have much qualification for making particles from scratch, I am going to sit here for a little while and try to find something that's close to what I want, and then work with that. Not sure why I did a move system. And because this is a powerful particle designer, it's not made specifically for retro games, so it's going to put out a lot of weird particles as well. Yeah, let's see. There's a sprite here. What happens when I turn that off? You've got a whole bunch of things like gravity. I don't want gravity. There's a lot of wiggle in this one too. I just want one color. Unfortunately, it doesn't remember one color for me. But, alright, let's try making a particle from scratch, because you could just sit here all day on this thing until getting what you want, but it's probably not ideal. So first thing is I want a color that more or less matches what I have in my Commodore 64 palette. And it should look like the barrel, which means I should come over here to barrel and pop that open. Figure out what color that is. So 145, 95, 51 RGB. What was it, 51, 91? 95, 51, okay. Memory's going on me. Okay, yeah, that's about the right brown, so that's fine. And I just want one color. Let's see, so let's try what this looks like. I don't want really an increase in size. I don't want any wiggle, basically. In fact, I don't want wiggle anywhere, because that shaky thing is kind of weird. Yeah, you can barely see what's going on there, so let's boost this up a little bit here, if it lets me. Closer. Scale. Just go with 1. Color's fine. I don't really need alpha, because I don't want like the edges of the particles to kind of look a little dimmer than the middle, because it's just not that kind of visual look. I'm actually not sure what blend does. Let's take a look. Particle Designer Blend. Well, unfortunately, Particle Designer is a pretty popular keyword, so it's not going to get me what I want. Let's just go here. That's not what I want either. Whoops, oops, 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 oops. What did I just do? I don't need that. Okay, back to where I was. Yeah, that's not bad. Designing emitters. Oh, this is all the same help file. Well, that's not very helpful. Preferences. It's all the exact same thing, isn't it? Well, alright. Doesn't explain what blend is, but so I'll just leave that alone. Speed is obviously going to be how fast these things shoot out. It's a little too fast. And let's see. Emit number. This is going to be the number of particles. I want more than just 5 because 5 is kind of boring. The life is a little bit too long. That's a pretty big spray. And the life is way too long, so let's do 10, 15, see what that looks like. Getting there. It's closer. You know, you could imagine those are like wood chips flying off of a barrel. The direction is a little weird. I don't know if this can accept minuses or not. Let's find out. No. Okay, so 360 minus 45, 325. Yeah, that's not too bad. Orientation. Yeah, I can see this kind of picks the direction they're going in. Kind of picks that center direction where the thing comes off. Let's change that to 0. It's not too bad. I think I do want to increase the size a little bit. 1 to say 3. Okay, that's way too big. Okay, and the life is still a little bit too long. Yeah, it's not a bad starting point. If I don't do orientation, it just does that. I kind of do want an orientation, but well, let's see. 90, 0. See what happens when I do this in just one direction. Okay, I suspect the orientation actually might be just the rotation of the particle. So that can actually be whatever it wants to be. 359. Yeah, it doesn't make a difference. Not a huge difference because there's not much of a shape to it. pixel. Yeah, that's not bad. That's not bad at all. Let's see, maybe it is worth having a few extra colors in there though, because just brown is going to get kind of lost. So let's bring in this, and probably another color that would make sense to come off of the barrel if a bullet hits it would be kind of a reddish color, as well as kind of a dark brown color. So maybe these are my two colors that I'm going to want, or actually tan and red. So let's go ahead and add two colors, three colors. So tan is 209, red is 209, green is 127, blue is 48. And the third color is that. $190, 53, 53. If anyone knows the history of like the Commodore 64 and how they ended up at this palette, I'd be kind of curious to hear about it. Like, you know, is there a reason they chose these particular colors over other ones? You know, did they do a lot of experimenting and figure out that these are the easiest ones to tell apart or the most useful or whatever? Be kind of curious. So if anyone knows, send me a message. You know, come over to bluetengu.com, send me a message, post a comment to YouTube. Just let me know, because I would be curious to hear about that. So now I've got a little more variety going on there. And the spray is all right, but it seems a little artificial. Let's try something else. 125. Okay, we'll see what that looks like. I may have to adjust this direction based on what it looks like in the game, because as it is now, you know, the angle of it's fine. It's just when the bullet hits the barrel, that spray has to come kind of in the direction the bullet was traveling. But may not even be worth doing that. Let's just make this 359, make it a nice even spray. And in terms of size, it's still a little bit too big. I don't want to take up half the screen with these particles coming out, because it's not that important that the bullet's bouncing off the barrel. So that may be all I need. Let's see, can I save this? It allows me to open, but it doesn't allow me to save. Well, just to be on the safe side, let's export this whole thing, call this barrel spray. And the great thing about Particle Designer is that it's designed to work with Game Maker. So what you can do is you could say export entire system, GML. This is the scripting language that's used in Game Maker. You know, when I was doing that sound table, this is what I was using. So if you do this, you get this GML file, and it's just a text file. But what this does is it gives you exactly what you need to put into Game Maker. So all you have to do to put that particle system into Game Maker is to create a script, copy and paste that stuff in. You know, I don't know if it needs this, but I think it'll error if it does it. And where it says sname, particle 1 and emitter 1, these are just default variables because it doesn't know what you want to call the particle system. So you have to change these. Let's call it PFX, particle effects, barrel spray. So wherever I see S name, I want to replace it with this. Hopefully not overwriting any commas or parentheses that I need. And the particle itself, use a really long name for it, but I don't want to run out of variable names or accidentally, use a name that I'm using somewhere else in the future. So the more obscure the better, because frankly I'm not going to be using this PFX barrel spray part anywhere else in the game. So the variable name can be as weird as it needs to be. And the last thing is to change this emitter. So BFX barrel spray emitter. And that's almost what I need, but PFX and since that's the same name, I am actually going to go with a really long name for that as well. Okay, that's mostly what I need. And you can see what all of these things are. Shape, size, scale, color, speed, direction, orientation, blend, life. If those look familiar, it's because that's what this was. So essentially, Particle Designer is also kind of a preview tool for this stuff. And so you can either tweak the values in here and re-export it, or you could just fiddle with the values here and change them here as you need to. Either way works. So I do have this script. One thing is, this X and Y that's here is also a default, and what this means is it's just going to, wherever this PFX spray is called, it's just going to try to emit particles there, but that's not what we want. We want it to spray out particles where the bullet hits the barrel. So just like the sound effects play script, I'm going to use arguments here, things I can pass in later. So I can't just run this script as is. And the timing is going to be the exact same as when we play the sound effect, which means when the bullet collides with the barrel, execute the script. PFX barrel spray. And I want it to appear where the bullet was, so argument 0 is just going to be X, and because I'm in the bullet object, that means it's the bullet object's, horizontal value and its vertical value. So it should play that particle system there. And one thing I also want to make sure I do is part emitter destroy. Let's see if I have to destroy anything else. Yep. And this is what I was talking about with making sure you destroy the objects. One more thing is that this defaults to stream, but I want burst, because I don't want it to just keep going and going. So that's one thing you have to remember to change if you do use Particle Designer with Game Maker. Now hopefully, even though I'm destroying these objects, the particles have already been shot out, so hopefully I don't have to put like a weight or something in here, but let's see what happens. If it even works. Part destroy PS. I guess I should look that up. because it's asking me for an index as well. So I'm not sure if it's trying to clean up the system at the same time or what. The particle system to destroy the emitter from. Alright, well, yeah, it's fine. So it's just asking me for this. Okay. Let's see what happens. Hopefully this works. Okay, I might be destroying it too quickly. I won't worry about the memory leak. Let's just see if I'm destroying it too fast. Okay. Yeah, it's really, really hard to see, and it's going to be even harder for you to see over the internet, but it is playing particles there. So it might have actually been doing it before, but I just wasn't noticing it. That's one problem with having particles the same color as the barrel. Now, in that case, it's definitely destroying it too fast. So let's see if there's a game maker wait command. See what the Steam community has to say on it. Alright. Doesn't seem like there's a really good way to do it, so... Let's keep it alive for half a second. How long was it supposed to be around? 5? It's actually way too short. Life. Let's go ahead and go with 10. But half a second should be plenty of time. And wait a minute, what am I doing here? No, that's not what I want to do. I'm really surprised GameMaker doesn't have an actual pause for scripting. Yeah, I guess because they are using alarms. Yeah, GameMaker is built around alarms, so they probably don't want the player to be able to pause too much. Yeah, okay, well they're just using alarms. Well, that's no good for me then. In that case, I guess I will. Not worry about cleanup for now. I'll figure out something. You know, maybe I'll just create an alarm in here that cleans things up and just make sure that after every room I do delete these particle systems. And I do have a message from Jamorian. He says, if you have the player character change directions, if you tie the gun blast particle to the bullet there as well, you accomplish the particle location when your bullets with your bullet start logic. And yep, it's actually a very good idea. I was wondering what I was supposed to do, like if I was supposed to take the character offset and maybe make the particles go from there, but it actually makes a lot of sense to do the exact same thing I'm doing with barrel, which is to have, you know, the particles appear on bullet creation. And that's, thank you for the idea. That saved me probably about half an hour of my life trying to figure out where the particle system should go. And I don't have to worry about animation later. So wherever the bullet fires out is where I have my particles coming from. Let's see, just to see what happens when I do that. Because I'm suspecting that brown is not working very well because brown is the color of the barrel. So I want to use color 1 and just use it with red. Because as you can see, I barely even knew that the particles were coming out. I mean, yeah, they're there, but the particles are the same color as these little bits of sand on the ground in the barrels, so that's no good. So let's just go with a much more visible red color, which should be the third one. And hopefully that makes things a little better. Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. The particles aren't very visible, but that's something I can adjust in here. Like in terms of size, probably, right now I don't have an increase to the size, but I probably should because, now let's change this back to 3. Because right now if I increase the size to say like 2, well, that's a little bit too much of an increase. 1, 0.5, 0.25, 0.15, just so they get a little bigger the further they travel away from the origin point. So that'll also help the visibility, so 1.5 is pretty good. Let's see, what else should I change? Speed. Speed seems alright, but maybe they should slow down a little bit over time. So 0.1, let's try that. 2. That's not too bad. So 0.2. Just so they slow down a bit. And Jamorian mentions with the particles that might have to go with black for the particle color since they're so short-lived and it's a very limited palette environment. Yeah, that could be the case because red's not that visible. In the game. Not as visible as I was expecting anyway. Let's get rid of that. Don't want to accidentally click on that. Let's see what changing the size and the speed over time does. Now I get a Bruckheimer kind of explosion whenever I hit the barrel, so that's not quite what I wanted. Definitely has impact, but yeah, I'm not Jerry Bruckheimer, so I'm going to tone down the explosion a little bit there. Looks alright here, but in the game it looks kind of crazy. And I think I know why, because in the game I changed this to 10. That could be part of it. So let's see. I don't want the... Actually, I made that size way too big. What did I have? I had size increase of 0.15. Well, that's one problem. 0.15, not 1.5. Okay, well that's the big problem. And Jimorian is definitely right. The particle effect size is fine, it's just the fact that the particles are practically invisible. So let's go with color 2 and pop that out. 0, 0, 0. Alright, well that makes sense, that's black. Just wanted to make sure Commodore 64 is using actual black. So let's change that. Color 2. And that's actually a good point. What does this number mean in Game Maker? I'm going to have to export that to find out. It's that number. Oh no, it's just 0. Okay. Well, easy enough. So now I should have 0 and red showing up. 0 and red, black and red showing up. So it'll have a little bit of a red to it, just to give it some semblance of an explosion. But it'll also have black. If I did my job right, which I apparently did not. So let's change this to color 2 and save that again. And make sure I'm using the function right here. It looks alright. Particle type color 2, 0, comma, and then whatever color I want to use. 2, 0. Yeah, I wonder why the black particles aren't coming out. It's rather odd. Yeah, it's still just those red ones. Can it not use black particles? I don't know what one means in terms of color, but let's see what it does. Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe I should just go back into... Let's turn that off because I keep jumping into this one by mistake. Let's go into Particle Designer and work backwards from here. Put all these parameters back in here and just re-export. So 3. And I kind of like having black be more common than red, so maybe do that. Test the burst. And see what it looks like. I mean, it looks like I'm doing it right. It might just be that black doesn't show up in a particle system or something, I don't know. Well, I will look that up because that is a little weird. Because theoretically it should be shooting out, you know, black particles and red particles, but it only looks like it's shooting out red particles. Obviously it's hard to tell in here because the background's black. So let's switch that to something more visible. Guess that's next time I start it up, it'll show that. Well, I will worry about the specifics of what it looks like afterwards. So for now it's just sufficient that there's particles coming off of the bullet hitting the barrel. And they're almost invisible, but they do exist, so it's just a matter of tweaking the visuals and making sure that it looks right. So now let's get to that one last task. So I'll actually keep this for later. Let's get to gunfire particles, which will be a smoke effect. Probably what would be the easiest way to go about a smoke effect. There is a smoke sprite. Yeah, that's not bad. Let's see, gray. Make sure I get the right gray color. (202, 202, 202). And let's try another gray. 142. One thing that it seems like in general with GameMaker that's going to be interesting, or at least that I'm going to have to keep in mind, is that because there is a limited color palette, it's probably a good idea to at least use 3 colors for particles. That way if one does get kind of lost in the environment, the other 2 can make up for it. You know, unless I do have a color that I'm just absolutely not using, but that's not always going to be the case. Okay, now we need to tone down the size. And let's see, the speed. I don't really want much speed to this. 1. I'll bet it's this blend thing that's doing it. I'll bet that's it, actually. Finally figured out what blend means. I think this might actually affect what this particle looks like. Well, the mystery behind what blend does has been solved. If you have blend turned on, it takes those 3 colors and comes up with some middle ground between them. If you have blend turned off, then it just picks one of those 3 and kind of goes with it. So that's why things were not looking right. Well, that feels good to get that out of the way. And to figure out what blend does. And that's still way too big an explosion. Doesn't really need a direction or orientation, does it? Maybe later, you know, to show kind of a spray coming out of a gun, I suppose. Still too fast. I don't... Well, let's keep the increase in size there. Getting there, that's still way too big. Not sure what the advantage to adjusting scale versus size is. Because they seem to kind of do the same thing. I mean, I guess scale could be something that you use externally. So yeah, I should probably just keep scale at 1. That's probably safe, because if I do want to change like resolution and the particle sizes to match that, I'm always going to be wanting to change scale, not size itself. So let's always keep scale at 1. Is that huge size just because this smoke is so big? Yeah, it's probably just a function of this sprite being so big. That's not bad, but it does need to be a lot smaller. Not sure if there's a way to decrease that size without fiddling with the scale. Yeah, I guess what I could do is, if I do want to change scale later, just multiply 0.5 by whatever that global scale change is, and just run with that. Little extra work, but it should be okay. And this is gun spray, or gun smoke. Hopefully Capcom doesn't sue me for using the name of their old Western game. GML Gunsmoke. Alright, let's give that a shot. So I'm going to do the exact same thing I did before. Create a script, pop this in, comment that out. Call it Gunsmoke, and basically I'm saying PFX Gunsmoke system part emitter. So wherever I see sname, replace it with this. And wherever I see particle, replace it with part. And wherever I see emitter, replace that with this. And again, where the particle system appears is going to be based on the object that's calling it, which will, thanks to Jamorian's idea, will be the bullet. And that should be good to go. Just so I remember in the future to do this. Because I'm going to have to do this somewhere. It's obviously not going to be here, but it has to be somewhere, because otherwise this junk is going to fill up memory when too many people are shooting. So just as a reminder, I'm going to leave that in there. Save this, and let's see. When the bullet hits the barrel, it's doing this. So when the bullet's created, let's put it right after that sound effect. And let's see what happens. Forgot to change one thing. This defaults to stream, which means the particles are just going to keep coming. So even though you have the burst, your testing burst out here, it's just going to default to stream, so you just have to remember to change that. Congratulations, I somehow survived that craziness. Okay, it's not a very good looking particle. It doesn't really look like gun smoke, it looks more like just a gray circle. So that's not too good. One other thing I think is that if this is called multiple times, because I'm not doing cleanup properly. I think that's kind of screwing it up here as well. So I do have to really look up cleanup. Because I think that'll fix some problems. I guess that's game design, since programming and game design will kind of get lumped into the same spot. So I'll move that over to a future task. Hopefully I'll just get it done sometime before next week, but make sure I leave that for there. And these are very rough particles. It doesn't look very good, obviously. You know, it doesn't look very smoky, which is probably because I'm only emitting one of those things, and I need to emit more. And have them actually have some speed and some direction and some orientation, so it does look like smoke particles are kind of going out, because right now it's just a particle appears right on the X and Y. Doesn't look very good. Yeah, since those settings are maxed out anyway, it doesn't really make much of a difference. And I don't want blend, color's fine, alpha. Alpha would actually make a big difference too. Yeah, alpha would actually make a big difference because there needs to be some transparency on these things. Otherwise it doesn't look like smoke, because smoke you can see at least somewhat through smoke, so let's at least make that change. Yes. And bring that in, just to make it look a little more smoky. Kind of hate leaving it just as it is. Alpha 3 is just news. I'm just going to have to put that in there. And did I change anything else? Let's see, life, speed. Create, shape is the same, that's the same, that's the same, that's the same, same. Okay. And then it's just the number of particles I'm putting out. Got increased a little bit. So let's see if it looks a little more smoky, but I think that's going to do it for today. Yeah, definitely looks a little more smoky. And because right now I'm firing off the smoke particle right when it gets fired, so that it kind of appears on top of the player. I probably want to put a little bit of a delay in there, so I can do that later, but at least for now, the particle system is working, so there is a visual cue that things are being shot in addition to that sound cue. So let's see. Actually, to be smart, I am going to just back this up and say this is episode 14. So this is the project as of episode 14, just so I have a copy of it. And so, you know, going back through this list of things that I did today, in episode 14, I did add sound effects to the bullet hitting the barrel, added gunfire sound effects, dodge sound effects, so when the player or the enemy dodges, there's sound effects. Dying when the player, you know, runs out of lives, there's a sound effect for that. And there's also a sound effect for when the player or the enemies get hit by a bullet. Well, actually, just the player gets hit by a bullet. And there's rough particles coming off the barrel. It's a little too black right now, but I can tone that down. It's rough, so as long as there's particles coming in the right place, that's enough for that. And same with Gunfire. There are particles coming in the right place. So that's episode 14. Let's see, for next week, this is all well and good, but I think it's finally time to move into animating this stuff. So I have it at 2 hours. And since it's something completely new to me, and I know how to do it. It's just, you know, making all the frames that you need to animate the character to make it look like he's walking, and then just playing him in GameMaker. But because it is completely new to me, and I do have it estimated at 2 hours, I'm actually just going to make the task for next week to make it look like the player is moving instead of just, you know, being this rigid figure that kind of moves around the screen. And, you know, once I get that done, it's just a matter of doing the same thing for the other types of animation. So, you know, if things go well with this, I could probably get into one of these, but it is actually going to take time to, you know, move pixels around and, you know, make it look smooth. So that's actually a pretty meaty task. Animation is always a meaty task. It's one of the things that takes a lot of time in games. It's usually why you also have an animation designer on the team who does that, you know, for their job. So that's meaty enough for next episode. So let's leave that at that. And I think I will wrap up. So let's close all this stuff down. Nah, oops. Yes, I do want to exit. I don't want to save the changes. Close out this if it lets me. And close all these things that I don't need. And, well, thank you for watching. For those of you who sticked with me through the live show, thank you. And, you know, a couple of you guys showed up at the start for the sound effects portion. And thank you for watching that. The whole video is going to go up later on YouTube. But I do this every Saturday from 8 to 10 in the morning in Japan time, which, you know, depending on daylight savings time and when it hits, I don't think it's hit in the States yet, but that means it's going to be around, the starting time is going to be around 4 p.m. on Friday for those of you on the Pacific. For Mountain, 5 p.m., Central 6, Eastern 7. If you're in the UK, it means it gets started at midnight between Friday and Saturday. If you're here with me in Japan, that means it starts 8 a.m. Saturday morning. If you're in Australia, it starts anywhere from 9 to 11, depending on where you live and whether daylight savings times hit or not. And if you're in New Zealand, it starts at noon on Saturday. So definitely check out the live show if you're watching this later on YouTube, or, you know, come back next week. You can find us at www.bluetengu.com. You can follow me on Twitter at btengu. I usually announce the episodes when they come up. And you could also follow on facebook.com Bluetengu Studio. I don't make as many announcements on that, but I do announce there as well. And let's see, you can, if you're watching the live show now, you can head over to www.youtube.com/Bluetengu Studio, all one word, to watch the old videos. And if you're watching this video and you want to check out the live stream, it's www.twitch.tv Bluetengu. And I hope you come by next week and see how I do getting the player looking like he's not just a rigid, stiff walking around. Get some movement going in him. Thank you for sticking with me on sound effects and particles. Hopefully now that sound's in the game, it won't annoy the heck out of you as you're watching this. If it starts to annoy me, I'll probably turn the volume down on it a little bit just to make sure, you know, it's still working, but not have the sounds blasting at me. And that's going to wrap us up for this episode. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.